Well, royal problem. It was, a thing. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but definitely a bit of a mixed bag. What, it's not like everyone in the community is praising this episode as some kind of demagogue or something, right? They aren't. Are they? We watched the same episode, right? Did we? Well, great, now I get to be branded as a contrarian.
I thought you were adopting a schedule.
Yeah, well, every critique idea I had got shot in the leg during production, and since Eloise is down, I can't exactly get at my only submission for character study, hence I'm skipping to this. Now, if you don't mind not interrupting my intro, greetings, fillies and gentle colts. I am Onyx the Dragon, and today, I'm in a jail. I figured that since everyone's probably going to hate me for hating on this episode, I'd hide in the one place they'd never think to look. The place they meant to put me. So this episode opens immediately on Starlight being called by the map. This is the first time a non-main 6 pony has been called, and I've seen more than a few analysts use this to speculate that this could mean the map could call on, well, anyone really. Unfortunately, I'm not so optimistic. In Gauntlet of Fire, the staff invented the whole Dragon Lord's call thing to write their way around having to use the map, so I doubt the staff will use it beyond the main 6 in Starlight. That said, however, those of you who watch my Q&A will know that I firmly believe the show will need to start focusing episodes on background and tertiary characters like Muffins, for example, if it is to stay interesting. I think the map would be a great vehicle for doing this, however, I unfortunately do not expect it to happen. Let us also not forget that Starlight, while not a main 6 pony, isn't exactly an ordinary character. It seems the world of MLP likes to follow a great man style of history, given that it often focuses on the acts of a few individuals, or that'd be great mare history. Either way, you get the point. Odds are the use of other characters will still be very limited. One theme song later, and we rejoin Starlight and Canterlot on our first solo mission, where we are introduced to today's conflict, the Royal Sisters. We proceed to spend the day and night respectively with each of them. Okay, I'm not going to be able to avoid this forever, so I may as well bring it up now. This episode is MLP's obligatory life swap episode. You know the one, where two characters get into an argument over who has it harder and decide to swap lives for a day to see who's right, only to realize they both have it hard and make up in the end. MLP tries to play with a traditional structure a bit to what I feel are mixed results. Most people have cited that unlike most shows which use a bet, this episode gets its life swap started by forcing it on the Royal Sisters via Starlight's knee-jerk spellcasting. A lot of people have cited this as a reason why this episode is so much better than other shows that try this plotline, but I don't agree. The main reason being, it doesn't address the core issue. See, a tired story like this is a problem because it's predictable. I feel I shouldn't have to explain this. While starting this story differently is nice, the episode still hits most of the same story beats. Tia and Luna still get into a fight over who has it harder, still find out they both have it hard, and still make up in the end. It's still predictable, so the core issue isn't solved. This episode tries to make this story feel different from other shows by modifying Act 1, or more accurately the transition between it and Act 2, which is nice, but Act 2 is the major issue. Some more deviation from the norm within the meat of the episode's story would have been nice.
The mobs are coming for you. Quick, say something positive to stave them off.
But that's not to necessarily suggest that the use of this story trope is all bad.
It's working, keep going.
See, this episode spends almost half of its time setting up the conflict. The day we spend with both sisters respectively, learning about the pancakes Celestia makes and the lavenders Luna puts up, both on a daily basis, this intro is much longer than when most other shows use the life swap trope, and as a result, we end up spending less time on it. Sure, it's not any less predictable, but at least I have less of it to complain about. Coming from MLP, the reigning king of awkward recaps, this is a nice change.
They seem to have left.
They're still too close. We're going deeper. Speaking of positive things, unlike No Second Prances, Twilight's overbearing teaching style actually comes off as endearing instead of annoying this time around. If I had to guess why, I'd say it was probably because it was far less overplayed this time. In No Second Prances, it came off particularly bad because it was used as a major plot point. Here, though, it's more so played for gags, and I think that works a lot better. I do have to ask, though, whatever happened to the moral from the crystalling? Unfortunately, it doesn't distract from the other flaws this episode bears, and I've noticed a lot of people saying this episode developed the Royal Sisters a lot. I hate to keep coming down on the analysis community, but we didn't learn anything new about these two outside some trivial daily routine type things. We know Luna's not exactly social, we see this as early as season 2 in Luna Eclipsed. Likewise, we know Celestia's air of perfection is just an illusion. We see this pretty much every time she's not on public display, such as at the end of Make New Friends but Keep Discord. We even know they don't exactly get along, as seen in Slice of Life.
Couldn't that last one have been considered a one-time thing until now, as attending a wedding, let alone forgetting the gift is an unusual event. Perhaps some thought they otherwise got along until this episode.
Oh, Earl, you make such a wonderful straw man, but seriously though, it's not like their last fight ended in a millennium-long exile to the moon. Granted, you do have a point that it is nice to see more of these fully fleshed out characters, but to say that they were developed so much by this one episode is disingenuous to say the least.
But how can you assume they fight? Slice of life could easily be an exception.
And what of their disagreements in the Crystal Empire or Twilight's Kingdom?
Are you sure you don't want me to go as well? Yes. Princess Cadance and Shining Armor are already there. The others will be joining them soon.
Their hours are already directly contradictory to each other. One runs Equestria during the day and the other works dreams in the night, so the fact that they disagree so much says a bit more than I think you give it credit for. Not only that, but with how bitter the relationship is by Royal Problem, I think it's safe to say their disagreements became more heated at least a few times. People don't just start fighting overnight. Or if that's not enough for you, consider this. We knew this episode was going to focus on the Royal Sisters from the moment it was announced. For there to be a story, there has to be a conflict, otherwise you'd have a pretty boring episode. So from this, we can conclude that the conflict would likely exist between the Royal Sisters. It'd not only be the best way to have a conflict, but with better writing, the most effective way to develop their characters.
You really don't like being questioned, do you, my lord?
That's it, I'm leaving and I'm leaving you here.
But sir,
Don't follow me! As I said, with better writing it'd be an effective way to develop these two, but unfortunately that didn't happen, which sucks. I'd have loved to see more development on them. Heck, this whole episode was hyped on that premise alone, but we didn't really see any of it. And the fact that it doesn't really grinds my gears personally. This episode hyped everyone up by promising to do so much for their characters. The buzz was so far reaching that even if you tried to avoid spoilers such as myself, you knew what this episode was trying to do, and it failed pretty hard. I feel a bit cheated over that personally, but that's not to say there wasn't any character development. Indeed, it was not the Royal Sisters, but Starlight who saw the lion's share of growth. From her first appearance as a cult ruler, we see she's always had a more hands-on and magical approach to solving her conceived problems. We see this behavior rear its head again post-Reformation in every little thing she does, where she outright mind controls her friends, but it begins to be turned into a strength as she is forced into leadership once more and to wear and back again, using her boldness this time in a setting where magic is not a factor, meaning it's that boldness, combined with a developed skill for leadership, that Starlight is solely relying on. Royal Problem finally brings this full circle, specifically calling it out and using it in conjunction with her magic to solve a problem that could have had more significant consequences than anything else she's faced thus far. On a side note, I think it's safe to say Starlight's doing just as much for Equestria as the main six by now. And my pining for a decent weakness to Starlight in my last video is temporarily eased as we see her greatest strength, her boldness, can also be her greatest weakness. As Celestia points out, her knee-jerk spellcasting could have easily gone awry as it did in the previously mentioned episodes. Let us not forget that she still hasn't changed significantly since her reformation. Speaking of Starlight, her psyche terrifies me. Coming back to the story a bit, we end on a climactic battle between a kind of resurgent Nightmare Moon and Daybreaker, Celestia's new equivalent. You know, that idea the fans had like 4 or 5 years ago, back when Solar Empire versus New Lunar Republic was a big thing. Nice to see the show catch up, but I mean, that party's been over for years. Better late than never, I suppose. Now, Daybreaker has a neat aesthetic with the whole fire motif, which makes sense given that the sun is often incorrectly associated with fire, which is in turn associated with evil. Fun fact, there's no oxygen on the sun, and so, no fire, and there won't be until it goes red giant. The sun converts hydrogen to helium, and as such is a giant nuclear reactor of sorts, not a fireball. Personally, I actually find this a lot cooler. Everything else about Daybreaker, particularly her personality, confuses me though, especially her fixation on power. Why is this here? It makes no sense. Celestia's quarrel with Luna has nothing to do with power. Now, if we wanted to make this version of Daybreaker make sense, we could have introduced her in an alternate universe where Celestia's ego 1,000 years ago clouded her judgment more than in our timeline, to the point that her ego manifested itself in Powerless. That doesn't really work for this episode though, in which case it'd make more sense to make Daybreaker an extension of Celestia's anger, similarly to how Nightmare Moon was for Luna's sadness, which would make much more sense in the context of the story, as we see Celestia is visually frustrated with her sister. In fact, this would actually be better for growing Celestia's character, potentially hinting at a deeper rage for her sister, and perhaps in general, depending on which, that could have fueled future Celestia episodes as well. For instance, we already know Luna's banishment was hard on Celestia emotionally, but what if we added some anger to that as well? Perhaps blame even? Both of which Celestia would likely suppress. It seems only natural after all, and her coming to terms with these emotions could have been an amazing episode. But no, instead we get this.
Who needs balance?
Either way, Celestia is able to fell Daybreaker and hold it. Am I seeing this right? Did Celestia just win a fight? Considering she beat Discord, Sombra, and Nightmare Moon and doesn't exactly age, we should be seeing her win a lot more often. And regardless, it's a nice way to end the episode. In fact, I'd say that while the episode as a whole is a mixed bag, the resolution is actually as great as fans claim the whole episode to be, and in my opinion, probably why people praise it so much. The episode ends on a few gags and our race top of the day. Sometimes you gotta go with your gut. I do like this moral. With all the warnings of book covers and wolf crying, it can be easy to forget that sometimes it's more wise to throw caution to the wind. That said, I'm a bit disappointed that this episode presents the moral so absolutely. It pretty much ignores instances where the devil is in the details, but we only have 22 minutes, so I suppose I can't expect the world out of a moon. Looking back on this episode as a whole, there are good things to point out, like the probably unintentional growth of Starlight's character, but I feel the flaws, such as the predictability and inability to fulfill the promise of developing the Royal Sisters, are much more glaring. For this reason, I give a Royal Problem a 5.66 out of 10. Thanks for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share. This is Onyx the Dragon, signing out. Of course.